Okay. Switch the slide there. Okay. So let's talk about, there we go, how it compiles it. So RStudio basically just runs the code every time you save the document. But if you want, you can hit, there's a little refresh button and it will run it, it'll compile it for sure then. There's the MathJax JavaScript library is loaded by default. So if you use this command right there, $x squared $, that's the LaTeX command for x squared, and that just yields the mathematically typeset x squared. Okay. There's slide navigations in the preview that you could take you to advance the slide. You don't get a lot of the nice HTML5 kind of effects in the preview pane. You have to view it in the browser, but in the notepad icon will take you to that slide in the slide deck. So clicking on more yields options for, again, clearing the knitter cache, viewing in a browser. And if you just type view in a browser, it does not create the file in the directory that you're working in, right? It, for me, and I presume for you, it creates it in sort of the temp directory, for your application files. So in mine, it's app data local temp for me. And then you can just create. You can use that also to create an HTML file. Then there's the refresh button. That'll refresh it if you've saved some changes and haven't run it yet. And then the zoom button brings up the new window. Okay, so how do you change things? So one thing, so if you notice, like, let me get rid of that. There you go. You notice, like, it's kind of cool, right? I don't know. Maybe you would just view it as gratuitous. Superfluous eye candy, but this cube effect, right? I did this for a purpose, and the reason was to show you how you can just change some of the automatic visuals. So at the beginning, right after each slide, there's like a kind of a YAML-like code, and for example, you can just put transition equals rotate, and that that sets the transition to this cube-like rotate. If you do, for example, transition linear, right, which is I think the default, then it'll switch to this sort of linear transition. See, like, that's the linear transition, and then there's the cube transition. The linear transition, and notice I did this right after that slide so that it occurs just for that slide, and then it'll go back to the default if I leave this option out. Whatever you put after the first slide is what it views as the default. And there's a bunch of transition options, and this link right here, in the presentation file will show you how to do it, or give you a bunch. Actually, I think I like the default probably best. I like just right to left, or left to right. RStudio Present has a nice built-in hierarchical organization tool. So there's several types, like section, subsection, that sort of thing. So right after a slide, if you do the kind of YAML type code that says type equals type name, I'm sorry, it's getting truncated a little bit here. But if you do type equals type name, then it will create it'll create the slide style for that level of organization. So this style right here, this light blue background with the white heading letters, that's the section. So this is of type section, and then this link right here, which is getting chopped off. But if you go, obviously if you go to the GitHub, you'll have the right link. And I'm pretty confident that everyone in this class can Google search this. Any rate, it'll give you the collection of sections. So you can have a nice hierarchical organization like LaTeX or some of the or just like ordinary HTML, and it has a different nice kind of formatting for each level of organization. So just by comparison, here's the subsection organization. I didn't put any text, but you get the point. The background is white, that the heading letters are black. Okay, you can do 2 columns, right? So 2 columns is really easy. So basically you just have the slides specified in the ordinary way, but you put a bunch of content, and then on a line by itself, and I could only get it to work when I had a blank line before and after, you put 3 asterisks, and then it'll dump it into 2 columns. And then in the RStudio site, you can change the percent space of each column. If you want like one column to take 70% and the other to take 30%, you can actually change that. You can do that in Slidify too. All the stuff you can do in Slidify. Then after the asterisk, you do whatever for column 2, and it'll put it all in 2 columns. All this, pretty much everything you can do in both. Well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Oh, see, this got truncated too. So the font family, I didn't have a ton of success just playing around with fonts, and I'll tell you why in a second. So anyway, right after the slide, if you do this kind of YAML-like code, font family equals font name, then that will change the font. This is exactly the same way you would specify in an HTML document the font family. So you can just go to any, like here at W3 Schools, they have a bunch of web-safe fonts, and you can put any of those in. So it's the same way you'd specify a CSS font family. And if you want to import a font, you can do font import URL to import fonts. And so this actual slide right here, you can tell the font, it doesn't look that different. Oh, I hit that link. You can tell it doesn't look that different than this font, but it's different. Is it different? Boy, it doesn't look very different to me. At any rate, I think it is a little different. To me, a lot of the sans serif fonts all look the same. They all look like Helvetica to me. Anyway, use font import to import fonts. And so here's some important caveats. I kind of learned this while I was playing around with the fonts. So the fonts must be present in the system that you're presenting on, or it'll just go back to a fallback. It will go to a fallback font. And again, I'm sorry, I'm truncating the slide there a little bit. If you import a font, then you have to be connected to the internet. So if you were doing an offline presentation, don't do import the font. So here's the font that I imported for this slide. It's called Risque. So anyway, it's called Risque. It doesn't seem that risque. Okay. So what's nice about RStudio Presenter is that it looks pretty nice by default, and it takes almost no time to learn. Probably if you're in this class and you've tried Slidify, you've seen that Slidify takes a little bit of time to learn. RStudio Present takes, if you're familiar with RStudio, takes basically no time to learn. The startup cost is effectively 0. But if you really want to change things, so Slidify, kind of immediately you're closer to being able to tinker with everything. Not perfectly so, but you're closer. If you really want to tinker with everything in either Slidify or in RStudio Present, you really need to know some HTML and some CSS and probably some JavaScript if you really want it to get great. But definitely at least some HTML and CSS if you just want to do the changing the style. If you have in your directory with your presentation file, if you have a CSS file with the same name, it'll just automatically load it up. Or you can just use CSS in the kind of YAML right after the slide definition. You can use CSS:/file.css and it'll import your style sheet. So you can, and if you want, you can create a class and name it class name to get kind of slide specific style control from your CSS. Or if you want even more further control and you don't even want it to be slide specific, if you want it to be specific subset of a slide specific, then you can have that class just be applied within a span. And then, so that's how you could change it permanently, so that when RStudio Presenter compiles it, it compiles it in the style that you want. But there's the other option, is that the end product is an HTML file and a style sheet and maybe some JavaScript, and you can just edit that as you want. But let me just say, this should be a last resort. The whole point of doing these kind of reproducible presentations is that they're reproducible, and that if you change something in the R code, you get the presentation back. So you lose a lot if you edit the raw HTML. At that point, why bother having done Slidify or RStudio Presenter at all? But let's say you have some really final product and you want to get it just right, and you don't want to bother with the intricacies of RStudio Presenter or Slidify or whatever, then sure, you can edit the HTML for that. But if it's like a presentation that you have to give frequently and update with new numbers every now and then you're making a lot of extra work for yourself by editing the HTML file. You're better off just figuring out how to get the CSS file right, the style right, and that way every time you compile